It began as a wistful day in the heart of New Orleans. The city was a hub of activity, alive with people bustling through the crowded streets, oblivious to the fate of Vincent Merrow. A man of fortune, Vincent had made a name for himself in the world of antiques. One particular acquisition, a cursed amulet from an ancient burial ground, was said to carry a ghastly curse, the curse of the living tomb. Vincent dismissed it as folklore, little knowing that he would soon find out perhaps is true. One evening, while Vincent was pursuing the intricacies of the amulet, he collapsed, falling deep into an otherworldly slumber. The following day, when his housekeeper, Miss Dupont, found him lifeless, she screamed, alerting the neighborhood. His body, still warm, was hastily prepared for burial in accordance with his publicly known last wish. The opulent funeral was a grand sight, with Vincent's mahogany casket being lowered into the freshly dug grave as the attendees sobbed. The last shovelful of dirt landed on the casket, the sound reverberating through the solemn crowd. It was the perfect, tragic ending to Vincent Merrow's illustrious life. Except it wasn't really the end. Unknown to all, Vincent was not dead, but trapped in a state of deep sleep-induced paralysis. The amulet's curse had come alive. He woke up to pitch-black darkness, the smell of earth heavy in the air, his breaths echoing hauntingly. Panic seized him as the terrifying reality set in. He was buried alive. His screams were muffled by the thick layer of soil above him, his desperate clawing at the casket ceiling futile. Hours turned into days, and each passing moment brought more despair. The little air inside the casket grew staler, and the oppressive darkness started playing tricks on his mind. Desperation drove him to break the curse, his only hope, the very object that had ensnared him. He fumbled with the amulet hanging around his neck, trying to decipher its cryptic engravings in the absolute darkness. While the outside world carried on, unaware of the horror beneath their feet, Vincent's lawyer had found a diary hidden within his mansion recounting the tale of the cursed amulet. His growing suspicion of foul play led him to the person who knew about the curse, the antique dealer who had sold Vincent the amulet initially. As the lawyer dug for answers, Vincent grappled with the darkness beneath the earth. He touched and finally decoded the amulet's riddle. It required blood as a tribute to break the curse. With a shaky hand, he pricked his finger on a sharp edge of the amulet. His blood seeped into the cravings, and the amulet grew unnaturally warm. Simultaneously, the lawyer had realized the truth, his fear growing exponentially. In a frenzy, he rallied the local authorities to exhume Vincent's body. The cemetery was once again alive with activity, but this time with fear and anticipation. Beneath the soil, a faint glow emanated from the amulet, illuminating Vincent's terror-stricken face. The light grew brighter, and a sudden jolt surged through him, lifting the paralysis. At the same moment, the scrambling of shovels and the wooden casket echoed through the tomb. As they lifted the coffin and opened it, Vincent sat up, gasping for air, his eyes wide open with terror. The crowd screamed, retreating as he crawled out of his grave, his breaths ragged, his body trembling. The cursed amulet fell from his neck, landing with a thud on the cold, hard ground. It glowed an ominous red, a stark contrast to the pale moonlight bathing the cemetery. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd as they retreated further, their faces pale with fright. Vincent was a ghastly sight, his clothes soaked with sweat and dirt, his eyes wide with terror that left an inedible mark on every onlooker. He clung desperately to the edge of his grave, his sobs echoing in silence. Back at the mansion, the lawyer, Mr. Howell, and Miss Dupont stared at the new, now empty, valet box that once held the amulet. Howell's hand shook as he read the diary's last entry aloud. The amulet requires a life to restore a life. Vincent, in his nightmare, had unknowingly activated a much more sinister aspect of the curse. His blood tribute had saved him from eternal darkness, but at a grave cost. As the sun rose the next day, an unnerving calmness spread through the city. People whispered in hushed tones about the previous night's horrifying event. Vincent was alive, but he was not the same. He seemed to age rapidly. His hair turned silver overnight. His skin wrinkled and his body weakened. Days passed and Vincent's health deteriorated further. Miss Dupont could only watch helplessly as the man she had served for decades crumbled beneath her eyes. Howell, driven by guilt, searched relentlessly for a way to reverse the curse. He sought help from occult experts, ancient text scholars, anyone who might know something about the cryptic amulet. Finally, in a dusty corner of a forgotten library, he found a book titled The Enigma of the Ancients. It spoke of a ritual, a way to reverse the curse, but at a great cost. The curse could be transferred, but it required another to willingly accept it. Howell knew that he had to do it. He felt responsible for Vincent's condition. His investigation had triggered the curse, and he would do anything to fix his mistake. Back at the mansion, Howell presented the amulet to Vincent, explaining his plan. Vincent, now a feeble old man, nodded, his eyes reflecting a gratitude and a strange peace. He had accepted his fate, ready to free himself from the relentless torment. Under a crescent moon, Howell stood over Vincent's open grave. The cursed amulet in his hand, he repeated the ancient words from the text, his voice trembling. As he finished, he pricked his finger, letting the blood soak into the amulet. A chilling wind swept through the cemetery, extinguishing the candles. The amulet glowed brighter than before, its light illuminating Howell's determined face. A sudden jolt swept through him, and then he collapsed. In the silence of the night, the only sound was the echoing thud of the amulet hitting the ground. Vincent's body, once frail and aged, began to morph back into its original form. A collective gasp echoed through the cemetery as the crowd witnessed the rebirth of Vincent Merrow. And there, by the edge of the open grave, lay Mr. Howell, his hair now silver, his skin wrinkled, his eyes closed. The new keeper of the curse of the living tomb. His act of sacrifice had redeemed his guilt, but in doing so, he had condemned himself to the same horror he had sought to end. His last breath was a whisper, the echo of an eerie prophecy. The amulet requires a life to restore a life.